Welcome, so pleased to have you here, and I'm delighted to be at the ICCS summit over today, and to have been invited to come and do this session with you. So I'm going to use a combination of slides and try to minimize those as much as possible and give you some experiential experiences as well. So we'll kind of get started here, I think, and get into the session. You can hear some people have experience with embodiment or somatic work already. Great. And if this is completely new for you and you're just thinking, God, I want to find out about this, then welcome. So I'm gonna I have some slides to share with you. It's quite unusual to see me with a slide deck, but that is a nice, in the time that we have, which is not very long. So I hope that we get all that you get all that you came for in the time that we have together. We will be inviting lots of interaction and have this be as experiential as it possibly can be with the time that we've got as well. So welcome, this is the Somatic Coaching, how to coach with the body and mind. Now, of course, by the end of this 1.5 hours, you won't be walking out of here, the finished article, but at least we can begin to give some pointers and a couple of experiences, a flavor for what that might look like to begin your foray into somatic coaching if you're new to this, and begin to deepen that if you've had a bit of experience. So before we get started, actually, I think we're gonna come back to this. I'll tell you just a little bit of a session outline. We'll come back to that in a moment. I want to start us with something a bit embodied, but I think maybe a little bit structuring before we do might be useful. So what are we going to be covering today in this session? We'll have a little look about what do we mean by somatics. Yeah, what does that mean? Why would we want to work somatically, and why now? Where does this approach come from? Coaching applications, experience somatic coaching, give you a little experience of that, how to learn more, and then we'll close. And a couple of additional points. We've got mentioned the session recording earlier. Don't worry, a lot of the recording will be edited out, but only that's really, that I described earlier will be included, and that for those who couldn't make it to the summit. And then the links to the slides, if it's not shared here with the summit, you can always get in touch and I can send you the links to these slides if you're an avid note taker. And one of the things we'll say is listen to your body. So I'm going to talk a little bit, I'll introduce myself in just a moment, but one of the things we talk a lot about at the Somatic School and the work that we do is the authority of the body. It was Christine Caldwell who actually, where I found out about this, but she actually got it from an anthropologist whose name I forget now, who talks about this idea that for midwives in the West, oftentimes a woman in labor will come into the hospital and sort of defer authority over to the experts, the medical professionals, and then the machines to let them know what's happening. In more indigenous communities, the dynamic is a little different. The woman in labor is considered the expert, the authority on her birth and her body. And the midwife and the professionals there are considered the experts on births in general. Right? But there's definitely this recognition that in that moment, much like in coaching, the way that we assume our clients are the experts on their life. Yeah, and in this notion of the authority of the body is this sort of somatic equivalent. They are the experts on their body and their sort of experience. So listen to your body throughout this session. If you feel thirsty, hydrate yourself. If you'd like to, if you feel more comfortable sitting on the floor, and encourage you just to go ahead and do that. We can kind of normalize in this space if there's someone standing at the back or moving around. So for this session, for this 1.5 hours, what would it be like to listen to our bodies and just respond, pop to the toilet before waiting for the end of the session if you really need it, that sort of thing. Okay, great. So a little bit about me, and then we'll move into something a bit embodied, and I'll kind of frame the rest of the event a little bit more as well. So just as a little welcome, I suppose, and then I'll come back to talking about me. Why are we doing this session, and why somatic in the first place? Well, you know that so when I began my coaching journey, sort of over unofficially, probably around 7 years ago, and then training officially as a coach a little bit less than that, my coaching journey, when I started, it was still distinguishing itself from the likes of counseling and therapy. And even when I did my initial training, that was more of a point, you know, what makes coaching and therapy and that sort of thing. That in the last 30 odd years that coaching's really established itself, those lines are blurred. We see a lot of integrative practitioners coming into the space. We see a lot of coach therapists, and this has never been more true than with the rise of the body-oriented approaches. You know, these body-oriented approaches that we can really see, you know, being a real emerging in human change work. You know, it just certainly has. We see a lot of therapists learning somatic approaches for working with trauma, for example, and we see a lot of facilitators and the like learning embodied leadership skills, you know, and similar. So why is that? And what's it responding to as well? You know, because somatic work and body therapy, I'm gonna just jump back to this slide, because actually this is what I'd intended to share. I forgot when we came here, the title slide. So somatic work and body therapies have been around, you know, really from in the late 50s, early 60s, in a big way. Then certainly in the 60s, they became very, very popular working with somatic work, and always remained on the fringes. And then a lot of innovation in that field for a period of time during the time of Esalen, which a lot of you as coaches or coach supervisors will probably be familiar with Esalen. It's an amazing place in California where you'd have the likes of Ida Rolf and Fritz Perls all having hot tubs together and talking about what happens, you know, how do we change, how do we grow, how do we develop as people. So it always remained on the fringes. But recently there's been a re-emergence, in a sense, and particularly within the coaching space, we're actually seeing the initial emerging, I would say. Although there are some practitioners like Richard Strozzi Heckler, which some of you may have heard of, who've been practicing somatic coaching for many years. Within the field of coaching, it's relatively new. Here's a good reflection of this. You know, in the ICF, for the ICF, they recently updated their core competencies. Somebody asked, and this is to quote, somebody asked, why isn't the body or somatics mentioned in Embodies a coaching mindset? And their response was, while we have anecdotal evidence that some coaches use somatic techniques in their practice, this element does not emerge to a significant enough extent in our data to be included. Fascinating. For someone like me who's passionate about this work, I find that very interesting. We'll talk a bit more about this later, but I truly believe that those who are beginning to incorporate somatics or the body in their coaching work are really at the pioneers of the profession that we call coaching, and shaping this profession as we know it. And so I do strongly also believe that in the next 5 years, we'll really see somatics and working with the body in the helping professions become the norm and best practice. Certainly if you're working more as a therapist, and particularly around topics like trauma, but it doesn't just, the buck doesn't stop with trauma. Somatics and trauma has sort of become somewhat synonymous recently. However, trauma is an aspect of somatic work, but not its entirety. Anyway, that's a little bit of pre-framing of the event that I forgot to do when we started. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more context. Now back to me, and then we'll do something a little embodied. So just a little bit about me, just keep it as brief as possible. but I will go back to the beginning in a sense. So as a child, and some of you may relate to this, but I really felt the emotions of others very deeply. So much so that in my teen years, I planned to get empathy tattooed on my arm. But thank God I didn't. I think I may have regretted it, but who knows? It's not a bad tattoo. In my teens, around that same time, I was actually diagnosed with something called ADHD. More specifically for me, in my case, it was ADD, attention deficit disorder. And I took medication for this until my mid-20s, at which point I began to seek out more natural ways to manage the symptoms. I actually stopped taking the medication altogether. And these days, I don't even describe myself as having ADHD, because a conversation, if we speak again for another time, is I have some views on that, very much like the work of Gabor Mate on that topic, and just but views on the diagnostic of ADHD, and particularly in the medicalized treatment of it. Anyway, I sought out these more natural means to manage the symptoms, and one of those things was mindfulness. And mindfulness gave me a real connection to myself, my environment, the present moment, in a way that I hadn't experienced before. I realized that later on, particularly when I discovered the field of somatics, which we'll be talking a lot about in this event, I realized that my sensitivity, which I thought was a weakness, might actually has potential to be my greatest strength. And also I had this idea as well, or developed this idea through that journey, and through from what happened later as well, which in part was becoming a coach, but that as individuals, we're not broken and we don't need to be fixed. Then in the coaching profession, that's quite, we have this view of our clients as creative, resourceful, and whole. So it's no surprise that I began to move from this psychology of disease, disorder, and dysfunction toward a real understanding and deepening my understanding of human potential and what helps people flourish and thrive. And I studied psychology and I trained as a coach, which you could say is, which certainly was born out of the human potential movement, and that whole shift in paradigm that happened in psychology around that time. As a coach, working as a coach, I always felt that non-verbal communication with my clients always felt very important. There was something, to me, I'd notice these gestures, facial expressions, and Nick often jokes about, I once said that we were working, Nick was giving a talk once, and afterwards I commented on his shoulders, and he's never forgotten that. I always said, I noticed your shoulders were a little raised while you're talking, and I was acutely aware of these things all the time, but I wanted to become more skilled in leveraging what I thought was powerful about that, something significant there within the coaching encounter, which I didn't feel like I was working with directly. And not finding exactly what I was looking for, what I wanted in the coaching world, I actually studied in a number of body psychotherapies. I trained in, I turned my attention towards the body psychotherapy basically, and I trained in focusing and Hakomi, authentic movement, Gestalt. And I learned from and continue to learn from leading thinkers in fields such as interpersonal neurobiology, bit of a mouthful, we're coming back to that later, and embodied cognition. And for me, the field of somatics really encompassed everything that I felt was fascinating about what makes us human. And the somatic school, which is the company I founded, was born out of a desire to create the coach training that I've been searching for, and that brings us to present day. So the somatic school really exists to create opportunities for experiencing attunement to ourselves, each other, and in the environment, and in doing so, embrace our wholeness. And we'll talk more about this notion of wholeness and working with the whole self and the whole client a bit later. Let's swing back here. I'm doing things in a funny order to what I intended, but hey, the job is the plan is improvisation, as a colleague of mine, Craig, says. So I'd love to just start us off with something a little bit more embodied here, actually. And what I'd like to do is, first of all, offer you a little somatic awareness exercise. And so who here does mindfulness or yoga or anything similar to that? Okay, so a few of you, yeah, great. So what I'd like to invite you into is something that for those of you who do something like mindfulness or yoga may feel similar to a body scan. And we're actually going to go from the peripheries of our body inward. And remember, everything at this session is your participation is completely optional. So only do what you feel comfortable doing and what you want to do. And but I'd like to invite you into something that would be sort of somewhat similar to a body scan. It's called a lead-in. And that's the beginning of a focusing approach, something called a focusing approach. And then I'd like to invite you into a little somatic experiment. And this comes from a school of practice called Hakomi, which we'll be talking about a lot more a little bit later. And so the intention of this is to give you a taste of right now what it might feel like to begin to draw on the wisdom of the body in the context of working with a practitioner. And then later on, we'll have an opportunity for all of you to practice a skill, a little skill that I'll share with you that you can go away and actually use in your coaching practices. But what this will look like is that after we've done this lead-in, we'll just be noting what's happening in the body. And mindfulness is a core tenet of a lot of somatic work. And when I say mindfulness, I don't mean anything particularly complex. I'm not talking about mindfulness-based stress reduction or any particular process. I'm talking very simply about attending to our present moment experience just as it is. And so while we're doing this, once you've done your lead-in and you're just noticing and attending to your present moment experience just as it is, I'm going to say a statement. And the statement will be something about being welcome in the space. So as you hear me say that, you might have some predictions, some ideas about how you might respond to a statement such as that. What I'd really like to invite you to do is if you can, just park that. Just see if you can put that to the side, like we do in coaching when we park our assumptions when we're working with clients. If you can just put that to the side and see if you could just be open to whatever happens. So in response to hearing that statement, probably, most likely, I imagine you probably have your eyes closed. You'll be just attending to your experience, just noticing your body, and then noticing how the body responds when you hear this statement. Allow yourself to experience something unexpected. Maybe it's surprising to you, yeah? And then after that, we'll have a little opportunity. I'll just probably put you into breakout rooms probably just for 3 minutes or so, 3 or 4 minutes, just to share a little bit about what you experienced, in response to that statement. Then we'll come back together and we'll share a little bit as a group, and then we'll move on with the event. We'll kind of get into the nuts and bolts, the meat of the event today. So one thing I'd like to offer you here is that for some of you, somatic work might be new for you or might be somewhat unfamiliar. And actually, and I can stop the screen share while we talk about this. And some of you, this might be a bit more unfamiliar. And what I'd like to offer you is something called orienting. So has anyone heard of orienting before? Yeah, a few of you. Okay. So when we begin this little exercise, if you choose to participate, you may feel that at any point you might want to stop for whatever reason, and any reason you choose to stop is valid. Okay, so you might be like, oh, I wanted to do this process, but now I'm doing it. I think actually I'd like to stop here. So I'd like to offer you something you can do instead, and that would be orienting. And this tool of orienting is something you can do throughout this session today for the rest of your lives, but also later on when we come to doing the practice a bit later, you can come to do this. And orienting, in very simple terms, is connecting to our environment through our senses. Okay, so let's just try this together for 60 seconds or less. It's not gonna, we could talk about it, but it's better to experience it if you feel compelled. So see what it's like just to let your eyes just take a little, maybe looking away from the screen and just letting your eyes for a moment go where they want to go. Right now, we're just going to practice connecting to our environment through our visual sense in this moment. And when I say letting your eyes go where they want to go, that might be unfamiliar language. So just think about it like this. Rather than searching or looking for something in your environment, what's it like just to have a receptive quality? See what you see when you see. And if your eyes land on something that is enjoyable, pleasurable, pleasant, just nice to to gaze on. Maybe just let your eyes rest there for a moment, just registering that as enjoyable, noticing that the moment it's no longer enjoyable, just letting your eyes once again take a little journey through the space you're in. And you can repeat that a few times. You know, if your eyes land on something else that's enjoyable, just letting them rest there for a moment until it's no longer enjoyable, and just letting them move around the room again. Just noticing what's reaching you from through your environment right now. What's reaching from the environment? How is the world making contact with you through your eyes right now, through your visual sense? And if you're enjoying that, by all means, continue for as long as you like. But I'd love to hear from some of you, maybe in the chat, if you could just type into the chat box, what do you notice in your state now? And any difference now compared to when you began, before you did the orienting exercise? Do you notice any change, or what do you notice in your state right now? Johnny says calmer. Marta, slower breathing. Nisa, more present and curious. Nina, very chilled. Sevilla, connected. Wow, here they come. More grounded, calm and quieter. Slow breathing. Happier, thoughtful, deeper breathing, more present, calm, feeling more present in my environment, slower, and relaxation. Great, lovely. And even if you just feel neutral right now, that's a positive outcome of orienting. So now, orienting, why do we do orienting? Well, orienting lets us come to connect with the very ordinary here and now. For most of you, you're probably sat in a familiar environment. There you go. Exactly, Sue, present here and now. For most of you, you're probably sat in a familiar environment. You're probably in a space that it might be your own home. It might be a space, I imagine it's probably a space that feels safe to you, it feels familiar, feels comfortable. As we orient in this way, that it sends signals to our brainstem of that ordinary here and now, where all is okay. This is our reality right now. So regardless of what we might be worrying about, or what we may be feeling nervous or anxious, this connecting to the environment through our senses, particularly for the visual sense, is very useful. It helps us ground in this current reality right now, and has an effect on our neurophysiology that has a down-regulating effect. So this is a great tool for self-regulating. So if you want to come back to orienting at any point, then you can do that. And remember that when we do this little experiment now, you're going to have an opportunity, if you feel like stopping, you can come back to orienting. You could open your eyes and just orient to the environment if your eyes were closed. Okay, so great. Thank you for sharing how that was for you. What we're going to do is to try this little exercise together now, just to give us a little flavor of this. And then we'll talk a bit more about somatics, and then I'll give you a little skill that you can use and put you out in some breakout rooms so you can practice. So if you'd like to participate here, then now is a good time to decide whether you'd like to do this with your eyes open or your eyes closed. For many people, closing their eyes makes it somewhat easier to connect to what they're sensing in the body. And we will be inviting you to just notice what's happening in the body here. So if you'd like to do that, then now's the time to close your eyes. And for everyone who's participating, maybe just bring some awareness to the soles of your feet, and whatever your feet are making contact with now, whatever your feet are resting on, if it's the floor or anything else. Just noticing the contact of the environment with the soles of your feet, letting you know you're here. And then maybe bringing some awareness to your calves or the back to your lower legs. You might bring some attention to the backs of your thighs now, maybe noticing if you're sat on anything, again, the contact of the seat beneath you. Perhaps bring some attention to your lower back. And your upper back. And just noticing your spine holding your body upright, the supporting your body. or if your back is resting on anything, maybe just letting yourself become aware of the support that's available for you there. You might bring some awareness now to your hands. And if your hands are resting on anything, just noticing those points of contact. Maybe bring some awareness to your arms, and the backs of your shoulders, maybe the back of your neck. And then maybe bring some attention to your head. Now letting your awareness drop to your throat, turning your attention inward. Down again to your chest. And then once again to your belly, your abdomen, stomach area. And just letting your awareness just rest there in the middle part of your body, your throat, your chest, your belly, your abdomen. And notice what happens when you hear me say, "You're welcome here." You're welcome here. Just taking your time, at your own time, in your own pace, and just slowly beginning to bring your awareness back out. For some of you, that might look like making contact with the environment for your hands, the chair, touching your chair or your clothing. Maybe opening your eyes if your eyes were closed, and just taking your environment again, just noticing the here and now, letting your eyes just go where they want to go for a minute or two. And while you do that, I'm just going to put you into breakout rooms. We'll have a brief breakout room just for you to share your experience. What do you notice there? And put you into pairs. And so what did you notice there? If you participated, and if not, just listening to your partner and hearing their experience. How was that for you? What did you notice, and particularly in response to this statement? You're welcome here. So we'll have 4 minutes of, roughly 2 minutes each, just to share a little bit, and we'll come back and we'll share a bit as a group. And we'll do a bit more on somatics. If you find yourself in a room on your own, we'll try and find your partner as quickly as possible. And there'll be a 2-minute countdown, and you can just ignore that. That's good. Welcome back, everyone. I may ask you to type into the chat just for the sake of time here today. So you may answer yes to this question. Did anyone else experience something that was surprising to them, something that they weren't expecting? And I'd love to hear from you here. And then if it wasn't surprising to you, or if you just want to share beyond this next share, if you could type that into the chat box so we can all benefit from your share, but then we'll move on for time. Okay, so I just want to offer you first of all, I just want to acknowledge those of you who have shared, whether on the chat here or in your breakout rooms. When we share of our somatic awareness, it's a very privileged view of you. It's a very intimate perspective, because none of us can know that of you unless we ask and unless you share so openly and generously. So thank you for your generosity in sharing. And I want to just give you a bit more context here about Hakomi, because this is what this statement that we're all sharing our experience in response of what our response was to that. That's where that came from. Hakomi is spelt like this, and I'm going to share with you this this information because so you understand the context of this. It was developed by Ron Kurtz. That's Hakomi, developed by someone called Ron Kurtz. It's a very integrative approach, developed in the sort of, I think it was in the 60s or 70s. the approach of Hakomi is by many described as a body psychotherapy, but by Ron, who created it, he describes it not as a therapy as such, but as a mindfulness-based assisted self-study. Mindfulness-based assisted self-study. One of the reasons I love Hakomi is because it's so complementary to coaching, what is coaching if not assisted self-study? And so mindfulness-based assisted self-study works very well with this because it sits within that paradigm, the same, very complementary to the coaching framework. And we just had a little experience of this. As you know, you had all sorts of experiences, but what I hear in common is a curiosity, or it may even, might even go as far to say a delight in what you discovered through that experience, just wondering, noticing, exploring, self-studying. Now, what we just did was something called a verbal experiment. Okay, and in Hakomi, a verbal experiment works like this. We say a statement. Where that statement comes from a huge attunement to the client, because in this context, we're using a very generic statement. For some of you, you may not have experienced anything. For others, we can know that in the Hakomi approach, when we do choose a statement, it's very much based on what we've witnessed, observed, tracked within our client's experience, and it comes from it's a very deliberate statement, very intentional. The statement is always evidently true to the person saying it, and always potentially nourishing. I'm sharing this with you not so that you can go away and start doing this, by the way, because I will share with you a version of the Hakomi skill that you can go away and use. But I just want to caveat what I'm going to say next by, this is not to train you in facilitating the Hakomi approach, yeah? But I want to give this to you because you could gain access to this information in books about Hakomi or online, but it gives you a bit of context. So why do we do these experiments? Well, normally, the reason we do this is because, as Ron Kurtz says, the body reveals. What does it reveal? Well, when we hear a statement like that, some people experience, so let's say you're welcome here. That was the statement we used here. Some people may have experienced melting, opening, expansion, softening, warmth, tingles. Other people may have experienced contraction, some tightness, a pinching, some tension, emotional release, whatever that might look like. And I'm sort of artificially kind of polarizing these experiences. They're not, there's not a good and a bad, a right and a wrong. It's an experiment, first and foremost. Doesn't matter. The client's experience is right, no matter what it is. It's just their experience. But here's the important thing. What that experience tells us, and it will be unique for everyone, is it tells us something about the client. What does it tell us about the client? Their belief systems. So the way that Hakomi works and works fantastic for working with, is what they call implicit beliefs. These beliefs that we have that are unconscious, they sit outside of our conscious awareness. It seems like a silly question to ask at a summit like this, but who's heard of the concept of limiting beliefs? I mean, I think everyone's looking at me like, come on, man. Okay, right. So limiting beliefs. We often know what our limiting beliefs are, right? We know that we believe we have a cap on our earning potential. Right? I'll only ever earn X amount of money, or we're aware that we believe that we're not good in crowds. We know that we believe that I believe I'm an introvert, or no, that's not necessarily a limiting belief. Let's say something else. Who can just offer a limiting belief as an example here? Just haven't got a degree, not educated. So that's a great one. So limiting beliefs often not educated enough, not attractive enough, not strong enough. It could be any of those sorts of things, right? So implicit beliefs, very, very similar, and you could say part of the same thing in some ways. You could say that two sides of the same coin, but implicit beliefs the notion is that these are beliefs that sit outside of conscious awareness. Most of the time, we're completely unaware we hold them. And the body can reveal these unconscious beliefs that we have about ourselves that are shaping our behaviors, our thinking, our actions, our decisions. These beliefs that we have, they shape those. So when we do an experiment like the one that we just did, some examples of belief systems that particular statement might reveal might be things like, I'm not welcome anywhere. Fundamentally, I believe I'm not welcome anywhere. Maybe I'm a person of color and I don't feel welcome in a group of predominantly white people. Maybe I don't feel welcome in my own body. You know, and so it could be different. It depends on the individual, obviously. So it's not prescriptive in this way, but the statement is intended to evoke and to see what the response is. And we just get curious about that. We're getting curious about it. So that's fantastic for working with beliefs, basically. Right, okay. So that's Hakomi. Okay, somatics. What is somatics? At an hour into the event, what is somatics? So soma is an ancient Greek word for the body in its wholeness, not just the skin and bone, but the body in its aliveness. So an inspirited body. The Greek word describes an inspirited body. The opposite of that is a body without spirit, a body without life, a corpse, or nekros in Greek. Yeah. So somatic approaches acknowledge the latest research revealing humans as integrated neuropsychobiological beings. Our neurology, psychology, and biology are intertwined like the weave of a fabric, to borrow Claire Myatt's description. And so this idea is, it says it acknowledges the latest research, but it's nothing new. It's what the wisdom traditions of the East, like Tibetan Tantra, Taoism, Buddhism, yogic traditions, have been talking about for thousands of years. Yet, in the West, certainly, only very recently has the science really begun to support these understandings of the human as a very integrated whole, you know, seeing a very integrated picture. So that's in part been, so if you're interested, interpersonal neurobiology is a field of scientific study with 40 different disciplines, ranging from anthropology, sociology, biology, medicine, neuroscience, coming together, looking at where the findings coalesce. And what it's doing is what's revealing is a very integrated picture of the human, that we are these kind of networks happen in response to life events, you know, this network of activity. It's very easy in the field of neuroscience to say that the prefrontal cortex is all about executive functioning, for example, or the amygdala is where the stress response happens. And then we can get very transfixed on the brain, for example. But actually it's a totally networked experience. And we now know that there's neural circuitry that runs down from our brainstem connected to every major in our body. Basically, our intelligence is distributed throughout our body in a way that conventional kind of understanding hasn't really spoken to. Modern psychology, up until very recently, is focused on the cognitive reflective mind, insight, logic, mental meaning making. But we're now beginning to shift our relationship to the body and see the body as no longer as merely a taxi for the brain. And as such, you know, and that's partly due to this, a lot of the science that's coming out, which really gives us this more evidence base for explaining this, also experientially. Basically, in somatic psychologist perspective, the mind is a body, mind is a body. Well, yeah, the mind is a reflection of the body and vice versa. The mind is a reflection of the body, body's a reflection of mind. Bonnie Bainbridge-Crohn's, that's a beautiful quote. If you want to know how the wind is blowing, look at the sand. We can see people's beliefs, how they think about themselves or the world, literally in the way they stand, their posture. We know that if we see someone who's slumped over all the time, shoulders forward, head down, the state of mind that that person might be in. It's a reflection. And that's just on the posture. And then there's everything that's happening inside that it's not visible. So the two things are intricately entwined, cannot be separated from the perspective of a somatic psychologist. If you're working with someone's psychology without acknowledging the body, you're only working with part of the picture. It's a globally, like the influences on somatics is global, from Western body work to wisdom traditions of the East, shamanic practices, you know, psychoanalytic discovery, advances in neuroscience, transpersonal psychology, all of these various threads have influenced the field of somatics. And there's many different ways to practice somatic work. And somatic coaching is a very emerging and burgeoning field right now, drawing on the understanding of other somatic practices and other somatic processes and understandings that can inform our coaching work. So I want to share with you briefly, and then hopefully, how long have we got? 25 minutes? Yeah, hopefully we'll have time for just maybe a quick breakout. So let's see. So we may be able to only do it one way. And then if you, in your own time, maybe you can find a time to practice with a partner. That might be one way we can do this. But I just want to introduce you to a concept that's really useful for you as coaches and illustrates this notion of somatic, why work somatically. So someone called Alan Fogel came up with these two concepts, conceptual self-awareness and embodied self-awareness, and it's tons of science behind this. So if you're interested, there's a book by Alan Fogel called Body Sense that really documents that in detail. If you're interested in science, you'll love it. But if you're interested in embodiment, you'll also love it too. Conceptual self-awareness, then, what would you just, hearing that, what do you think conceptual self-awareness is all about? So conceptual self-awareness, thinking about the self, typically the domain of most coaching interventions. Most coaching work will exist within that thinking about the self space. Embodied self-awareness, feeling or experiencing the self. Now, experiencing is the important word there, really. It's the actual experience of the self in this moment, right? Based on linguistic, symbolic forms of expression. That's conceptual self-awareness. Again, where most conventional coaching exists, based on sensing, feeling, and acting in. So when we talk about it, it's not thinking about sensing, it's not thinking about feeling or thinking about acting or talking about acting, it's the actual act, it's the actual sensing, it's the actual felt experience. Conceptual self-awareness, engaged in thought processes. Again, typically where most coaching exists. Embodied self-awareness, being in the subjective emotional present, is what Alan Fogel describes that as. Has a lot of science how that's linked to health and well-being, our ability to be in our subjective emotional present. It basically, that's somewhat linked to acceptance. We talk in somatic coaching, oftentimes we talk about the notion, well, at somatic school, we talk a lot about the notion that to be with our primary subjective experience, a lot of big words, basically just to mean our direct experience, like what we're experiencing here and now, is where actually the deepest insight comes from. That's where we access the wisdom of the body, not in thinking about a feeling, but in actually experiencing it and then reporting on what we're experiencing. A bit like you did earlier, as we reported after we did the experiment exercise. Engaged in thought processes is, oh, sorry. That should have been a different point. That I can't remember what that last. I think that last point was basically it's about abstraction. It can take us to any moment in time. It can take us into the past. It can take us into the future. That's one of the huge benefits of conceptual self-awareness. It's not saying embodied self-awareness is good. We never want to throw the baby out the bathwater, especially if, well, I wouldn't want to throw the baby out the bathwater. And from a somatic perspective, when we're looking at an integrated whole, we don't want to do away with thinking and bring in the feeling. It's about embracing both worlds. Conceptual self-awareness and coaching is super useful for us when we're thinking about our vision for the future, or what happened yesterday, or who we are, who we want to be. I want to be a leader, for example. Embodied self-awareness is concrete, lived in the present moment. And there are great benefits to working with that as well. However, quite often we're not working in that way when we're coaching. You know, doesn't tend to be where a lot of our interventions are, unless you bring in a lot of mindfulness work into your coaching, which many of you, Emily, looking at you. So somatic coaching is the process that involves your whole self, all forms of intelligence, including but not limited to the intellect. Drawing on your full sensory, and so what that means is, your emotional, your feeling, your physical, but the somatic, and recognizing, acknowledging that there's intelligence in the body. Drawing on your full sensory capabilities for invoking greater insight, discovering new possibilities, and accessing deeper awareness. Right, let's give it a go. We're going to have time for you to do this one way, I'm afraid. We'll do a 10-minute breakout, and basically whoever chooses to be coach, what you're going to do here is we're going to practice a version of Hakomi that's on the more, we're going to do this in a way that's the least kind of evocative, because what we're not looking in this exercise here and now, and for the time we have to share something that's really going to bring something up. Okay, some real core material that would need more time to be worked on. So what we're going to do here is the client is going to bring, and I hope some of you have brought with you, a decision that you're in, a decision that you're grappling with. For the first couple of minutes, coach, if you can, in the time that you've got, just explore what that decision is. So trying to launch right into it. What is that decision? And try to identify, if you can, the various options that they see possible, that they're struggling to move forward with. What, you know, they're struggling to make a decision. So there must be a number of options that they are in, possibilities. If you can, coach, try to note down what are those possibilities in the words that the client uses. So you can work collaboratively with your client to say, okay, what are the, how would you describe that in a sentence? How would you describe that in a short phrase or sentence or statement? Then the coach, what you're going to do is facilitate something very similar to what we did earlier, but this is going to be an opportunity for the client to see, what does the body know about this decision? What does the body know about what kind of, how do I put this? Not what they should do, but what feels right, or what, you know, or what might be a way forward, drawing on more intelligence than just the thinking mind. Yeah. Okay. And so how that's going to look is like this. Here's the sequence. You're going to invite them into mindfulness in whatever way they do that. So client, you just come into settle yourself, go. Coach, you can help them here, but you don't spend a long time doing this, but just help them settle. The intention is not to relax them, just to bring present moment awareness to their present moment experience, just as it is. When you're ready, client, you're going to give the coach a signal. When you're in that state, you're going to say, okay, or or just lift a hand or something like that. You're going to signal to the coach that you're ready to hear the statement. And then coach, in a random order, you'll just share, so not necessarily the order you explored them in, but you'll share one of those possibilities and you'll say it. You'll say it with these words: notice what happens when you hear me say, and then that possibility, that option, as in that short statement. Everyone following so far? Can I just see by show of thumbs or in the chat? Just get a general consensus. Okay. Once you've said it, the coachee is going to then just report on that, on their experience. And now we don't have very long here, so it's 10 minutes. So what I'd probably suggest is try to less is more with the time that you've got here. And a slower process is always a better process when it comes to somatic work, because when you say this statement, the client might respond immediately. Oh, I noticed tightness in my chest. Oh, I noticed tingling, or a smile comes to my face, or I noticed, yeah. But that might not happen immediately. There might be a few moments of silence while they let the body respond a little slower than the thinking mind typically responds. It takes a little while. So slow is good. If you only get to sharing one possibility for now, that's okay. If you only do this experiment once, that's fine. But if you have time and you want to try a few of the different possibilities, then after you've done that, you feel free to shake it off a little bit, maybe. Yeah, you might just shake off the sense of the last one, the client, and then the coach, you wait for them to come back into mindfulness, wait for their signal, and then offer the second one. So you repeat that process again. The reporting is what the client does. Reporting is, this is what my experience was. Notice what happens when you hear me say and share one possibility. Exactly. Thanks, Emma. You're noticing what happens in your body. You're noticing what happens. It might also be a thought that comes, whatever happens spontaneously and involuntarily. Okay, so we're going to do 10 minutes now. We'll have 5 minutes when we get back, just to do a couple of reflections and questions. I'll tell you how you can learn more about this if you want to when we return. But for now, 10 minutes, one way. Decide when you get into your pair, who wants to be coach, who wants to be client. Just give this a go for 10 minutes. See how far you get. Remember, you can come back to this later, and then we'll do some reflections at the end. There are lots of smiling faces. I imagine some of those might be like, "Ooh, we got cut off there." Yeah. And some of them might be just because of joy, unadulterated joy. But I'd be curious, so we've just got a couple of minutes before technically you go for lunch or you have lunch for this summit, a lunch break. But it looks like we might run over by a couple of minutes potentially if we want to do questions, or we can stop on the dot. Why don't we'll have two versions. There'll be a kind of stop on the dot for those of you who have to go. which point we'll have kind of completed. And then for those of you who want to stay on, I'm happy to stay for another 5 minutes. But let's just say this now, it's 1:30. Technically speaking, it is, if you need to go for lunch, it's lunchtime. Let me just quickly flash up this here. If you wanted to learn more, I had a little video that I might share with those who stay behind for a little bit longer, but oops, and it's going to start. Just a little bit about the Somatic School. If you would like to learn more, we have the website, somaticschool.com. And if you want to learn about a proven framework to coach with the body in mind, then we have an event called the Online Introduction to Body-Oriented Coaching, and you can access that at this link. If you'd like us to register your spot and you want us to do that for you, you can type into the chat, sending directly to me, so you don't share it with everyone, your name and email address, and we can just book you on manually. Otherwise, you can head along to that link there. In fact, yeah. In fact, I could even probably even type it into the chat. Yeah, okay, cool. Okay, so I'll just leave that up then while we take any, so that's, yeah, 1:30. Any other questions? I'm happy to stay behind for another 5 minutes. One thing I'll say, just while there's this little pause here, is if anybody, that was a short session, if anyone was left feeling like they're sort of left with something from that, what I really encourage you to do is, you've actually got this break now. If you know the person you were working with, you might continue just to spend a little bit more time with them there, like, and actually, you know, just kind of work on or with whatever it was that was with you. If not, you might, you know, I'm available at nathan@thesomaticschool.com. You can drop an email as well. I'm happy to speak with anyone after this session, one-to-one, if need be. So here's my contact details. If you want to get in touch, oops, I just sent that to Nick. 1 second, that's not. If you want to get in touch, then you can do that there. Thank you, everyone who's going now. Pleasure to have you with us. As I said, I'll leave the recording going for a little bit longer. Okay, no, okay, we're closing on time. Cool. Nick, I didn't know you were still here. Great. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Great to have you with us. And yeah, like I said, I'm available to contact if you have any questions following on from that session or anything like that. If you just want to get in touch, and yeah, enjoy the rest of the summit and have a good lunch. Bon appetit.